living down in Queenscliff, I've been looking and stalking the rip for about 20 years now, but for some reason it's eluded me in terms of painting. When you look at it, it looks by and large quite flat. Point Nepean on the other side, Point Lonsdale and Queenscliff. And it really wasn't until COVID came along that I started to stalk the rip a little bit more intensely. Early morning and late at night, 4 or 5 p.m, 6 p.m, around dusk, and in particular during autumn, winter and early spring. In summer, it's very uninteresting really. It's just quite a flat body of water with clear blue sky, and it's very hard to make anything visually interesting from that. But during those darker months, something opened up, and the paintings which will be in this show, they've got a strength and a moodiness to them which reflects the storms and the weather, and kind of this really harsh beauty that the rip has, and this kind of seething turbulence and undercurrent. When I kept looking at it, there were sort of waves coming in from one direction, then another direction towards me, and then near the pier, and then as you look around towards Queenscliff, there's this sort of gentle rippling. So there's all this sort of action happening, and then this dark blue charcoal sky. It looks sort of ominous, but it's quite powerful and beautiful in its own right. So, and then occasionally, of course, a ship would come through at great speed. You'd look, and then you'd look again, and it'd be way out, sort of going towards Tasmania. So sometimes some of the paintings reflect some of that that steel, that imagery in a very abstract form, sort of somewhere in the form, sort of appearing. So it was actually quite a good thing to finally get something down about the rip that I'm happy with, because I've painted it, as I said, started looking at it 20 years ago, and it was just rubbish. And it's hard to know why you can look at something so often over such a long period of time, and then all of a sudden at some point something opens up to you. And I suspect that's got to do with COVID in a way. Maybe I was looking at things more intensely, or perhaps looking at things differently due to being isolated. But that kind of that process really is just as interesting to me as making the paintings, really, how that's come about over the last 20 years. So it's quite a long gestation for a body of work. Lake Mungo, what an extraordinary place that is, really. It's really quite mind-blowing, really. So during the two COVIDs, particularly the first one, I found that I just had enough of digital overload, really, and it was just reading the papers a lot more, just a lot more news, everything, and it just felt, I didn't like it, really. I just didn't like it at all. So I decided in between the two COVIDs to walk from Mildura to Lake Mungo. I just needed to have my feet in the ground, really, and that was important. So I painted Mungo itself lots and lots of times. I've probably been there 6 or 7 times, but this time I just wanted to experience the journey from Mildura to Mungo. And during that walk over 5 days, I fasted and just did water drop-offs along the way, because I wanted to change how I felt just physically in that landscape. On reflection, it was probably one of the most stupid things I've ever done. I was that damn hungry by the second day, to the point where I was a little bit unhinged, I suspect, and that continued for the remaining days of the walk. But having said that, again, I saw things that I'd never really seen before on that journey. You become really quite interested in the way the track or the roads sort of form, and you try and, when you're walking, look for the harder ground, but in that there's lots of layers of clay and ochre and pigment, and then there's some salt bush and some trees off to the side, and then the linear forms surrounding that walk. And as you approach Mungo, you can sort of see the Great Walls in the distance, and even beyond and around towards the back of Mungo. I think the other thing that was important for me in doing that walk was really Mungo man and Mungo woman are really carbon dated at 40, 50, maybe even 60,000 years ago, and living a rather fecund, beautiful life around Lake Mungo when it was full before the Ice Age came along. And there was just something really quite primal. There was no phone coverage, no nothing, and just on my own, camping in the bush, just with a fire at night and just water, and the stars were extraordinary, really. You know, it's the sort of grounding experience I really needed after the first round of COVID. So the paintings in this show have come from that walk. Some works on paper and on paintings on linen. It's just beautiful, really. It's just beautiful, but there's a poignancy and depth to that landscape signified by the indigenous population and Mungo man and woman as a reminder of that rich history. For some reason I started to look at the tea trees and the moona trees, and then I begin to notice how their forms twist and gnarl. Really interesting shapes and forms and surfaces with the bark and so on. And I looked at them, but I never knew what to do with them. They're beautiful as a tree or a group of trees, but when I started to look at individual branches, they're also unique, and started to think about why is one branch sort of like this, but another branch might sort of twist right back on itself and around itself. And they're the forms that really interest me most of all, because they almost defy gravity in a sense, the way in which they move. And I can't work out if they're genetically programmed to do that or whether they're being bashed around by the elements, which are fierce down here, of course. But that aside, there's just this elegant beauty about the form of the timber, and then I started to think about continuing that form with something that obviously wouldn't really occur in nature, but at the same time something that's really quite grounded and true and organic, and bronze and stone came to mind.